Welcome back to Brave Business Conversations. We're on our second segment, and it is absolutely my pleasure to bring you Patrick Williams. You are. I've looked forward to this show for a very long time, Patrick. Only because I love walking into your cafe. So welcome to Radio Bath.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I have great interest in design, especially Georgian design. But first, I'd like to, the listeners to get to know a little bit about you. So tell us a little bit about how you got into design and why Georgian and what you do in Bath.
Well, the name of the shop and my practice is Berdoulat, which is the name of our family home when I was growing up. So it was a house in southwest France that my parents bought when I was in the womb, and we gradually restored it as a family over the course of 25 years. And that's where I I suppose, learnt not so much about interior design, but about how ancient buildings are put together and how they should be restored. Kind of learning at the coalface, I guess. But also my parents both had this amazing sense of aesthetic that I think I either inherited or through a process of osmosis, growing up around them and their interiors, I developed a real passion for decoration and beautiful objects and how to kind of go about curating them. But I had no formal training in interior design. I studied fine art at university and then just had this kind of passion for working with old buildings, particularly Georgian buildings. It's my favourite period for design. And so I kind of, after university, I ended up working on some of my own projects and then doing it for other people, and that's how the practice was born. And I decided to name it after the house, where I caught the bug, I guess.
Yeah, appropriately so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned old buildings and how they were built, and it's obviously probably not the same as the way we build buildings now. What do you find is some of the significant distinctions that helped you understand how to restore old buildings?
Well, there's just so many things that what I love about working with old buildings is, you're constantly learning more and more about how they're put together. For example, the building where we currently are in the shop, we did a lot of work down in the basement area. And I remember one day, it's always been really dry down there and hasn't had that kind of damp basementy smell. And I'm always amazed at how that's achieved in a building that was built in the 1770s before tanking systems or DPMs or anything like that you might use now to overcome those sort of problems. And I remember drilling a hole kind of in the bottom third of the wall, and soot, black dust emerged. And then when I drilled a hole on the top side of the wall, near closer to the ceiling, it was what you'd expect, the kind of Bath stony coloured dust. And a friend of mine who is a fantastic builder and very knowledgeable about all these things, explained that the Welsh pennants on the floor would have been set on a kind of compacted layer of soot that would have also run up the bottom half of the walls. And, it's a natural, it dispels water and is a natural way of tanking and keeping out the damp. So it's things like that I love, just constantly learning about those kind of processes and processes that are still working, 300 years on.
And when we talk about Georgian style, obviously Bath is full of Georgian buildings. People who live in Bath love the Georgian look. What was so special about the Georgian era for people who may not have studied that?
I think the reason we love Bath so much, and it's rare that anyone comes here and doesn't get this feeling, is to do with proportion. And my wife is very into diet, and you are what you eat, and thinking about what you consume as being really vital. And I believe that what you consume visually is really, really vital as well. And what makes Bath so special is that relentless Georgian architecture, street after street after street, and each and every building is beautifully proportioned. And there is a reason why a sheet of A4 like this one in front of me works, and it's to do with all these wonderful mysterious things to do with the golden ratio and, you know, Leonardo's outstretched man on the wheel, all of those things. Ultimately it's where form relates to the human body. And so that's why we are happy in Georgian buildings. That's why we are happy looking at a Georgian building, because there's something that just clicks, and it relates to our bodies and our inner selves. And you find, you know, I mean, the golden ratio is there throughout nature. It's something that really fascinates me. It's this kind of there's some kind of code going on there. I think that's, you know, we've not yet fully understood where we all came from and whether there is a God and things like that. But there's something there in a sort of slice of cauliflower that is the answer.
Well, it's like it's why things look good, why things work, and also golden ratios actually apply to the human body as well, right? Was it the Greeks? The Greeks came up with it.
I'd imagine so. Yeah.
You multiply by 0.618, and you get the length.
Yeah.
You multiply the width by 0.618, and you get whatever.
And the Fibonacci sequence with the spiral.
Yes,
and, you know.
it just works. It's almost like, I'm not sure if I'm making the right analogy, but why does color work? And somebody invented the color wheel. There's different opposite colors.
Well, that's a really fascinating. Actually, I'm going to be doing a series of podcasts shortly with Edward Bulmer, who is the kind of color master. And one of the subjects we're thinking of addressing is this idea of whether color can relate to taste.
Gustatory.
Well,
taste.
yeah. So I mean, it's kind of bound up in all these things. Like a working title for it is what goes together grows together. When you're cooking a dish, and you know, if something is growing right next to it, or seasonally, if something grows at the same time as something else, it's likely to be a good pairing, you know, on the palate. And whether there's some kind of relationship between you know, between that what you witness in nature being together as a color scheme can then inform the color scheme that you might employ in a building, an interior. So I sometimes kind of will make, I don't know, think of broad beans with some diced red onion. I mean,
that's what we're having tonight, by the way, with a bit of garlic on this.
You know, the white and the purpley onion and that sort of sagey green. I mean, what an amazing color scheme.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. It's delicious.
Yeah.
To the taste as well as to the eye, and that's something that I'm really fascinated by. That kind of synesthetic thing between food and
colors,
color schemes.
I was taking a course at Bath Flower School, right? And you sometimes overthink things when you're trying to put flowers together in a bouquet, for instance. And their method, it's nature. Everything matches.
Yeah.
Don't worry about going and say, "Ooh, should I put this and that?" Just put everything together. By the time you put some greens in, it just goes, you know. And I think that's where it's going. We'll be back with more of your thoughts, Georgian homes. But before that, you have requested a certain song, and I wondered why you requested that song. And it's something by the Talking Heads. Tell us more.
This is it's called "This Must Be the Place." And it's one of my favorite songs, and it's a song that my wife and I love and always dance around the kitchen to.
Ah, okay. We'll enjoy it. Maybe we'll do a dance around the studio as well.
Yeah, sure, why not?
We're back with Brave Business Conversations, still with Patrick Williams from Berdoulat. We are talking about Georgian designs, or just designing your home. You're building a nice home for yourself. Can you overthink it sometimes? Can people overthink it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes it's very useful to you know, have fresh eyes, and for someone to come into the mix and go, well, actually, have you thought about this, or you know, and sway you a little bit. Um,
Because you didn't come from formal, well, I'm sure you had lots of formal training, but this is a natural
I
thing
had
for
no
you.
formal training. I mean,
Yeah.
literally, kind of just winged it, really.
You know,
But
when the first time I walked into your shop, we walked around up and down, and the comment I made to a friend of mine was, he just knows how to put things together. And I think lots of people just overthink it. Oh, does it go with this and this? And they'd read something or but it's
yeah,
just
I
that
think
natural process.
yeah, and I think that really is just osmosis. As I was saying, it's about, you know, if you grow up in a certain environment where there are, you know, juxtapositions of certain textures or colors, or just, you know, my parents really enjoyed certain styles of furniture,
Mm.
or certain kind of textures, or whatever it may be. And my father was always really amazing at kind of pointing out details to me. And I think that's where I really got my appreciation for kind of, you learn to look in a certain way. Um, and I think to be honest, I think a lot of it, this sounds really pretentious, but it's just having good taste, which
Mm.
of course is subjective. But I think the kind of people that come to Berdoulat, you know, and want to employ us as interior designers to work on their home, just kind of they see something we've done and they're like, yes, that is
The
what I
look I
enjoy.
want.
That's the
Yeah,
look. And
exactly.
so, you know, and it's really difficult to kind of move away from that. And I think when I was starting out, when Berdoulat first started, and I was working for people who hadn't necessarily seen the Berdoulat look, they just needed some help with their house, and they had lots of ideas about what they wanted, and sometimes it was really quite hard to incorporate those ideas. Like there was one where someone had kind of shot a zebra, and they wanted to, you know, the zebra skin needed to be under the glass coffee table. And
Do you reserve the right to say no?
no, it had
You
to
did it.
feature because, you know, beggars can't be choosers, and I kind of needed the job. But then gradually, it got to a point where, you know, now clients will say, look, just do my house, up to you.
Mm.
You make the decisions, and that's lovely. And I think I think probably that's when I do my best work, is when I'm just allowed to kind of have real, you know, autonomy, and just kind of really make all those decisions myself. Um, so it's got easier and easier for me over the years. But having said that, it's really lovely when someone else does come into the mix. Like, let's say the client is really passionate about a certain building they've seen, and they want to bring in influences from that. Or maybe we're working alongside another designer or an architect, and they bring in their thoughts into the mix, um, and something fresh comes out of it. That's really exciting as well.
Yeah.
So I recently did a project a couple of years back where the client uh, employed me and Tim Whitaker from the Spitalfields Trust at the time, to work together on restoring a building, and then furnishing it top to bottom. And the client had a private collection of furniture and paintings, and it was just so much fun because we just went to all these kind of, you know, warehouses and other houses, and just going, okay, I'll have two of them, one of them, you know, and just picking out these beautiful, you know, pieces of furniture and mirrors and paintings and vases and so on. And actually, it was really fascinating doing that with Tim, because he has his own way of doing things. He's got his own style. And we were chatting just the other day actually, and he was showing me some pictures of his living room and the way he'd chosen to kind of hang pictures in a certain format. And I said, that's such a Tim hang,
Yeah.
the way he'd done it. And I think I used to be, quite precise about, let's try and line up that picture with that dado, and let's try and kind of think about the form of this, that, and the other. And Tim's a lot more just kind of just shove it up on the wall. Doesn't matter if it's leaning slightly. He's just more laissez-faire about it. And you end up with this brilliant look, and it just looks like it's always been there. And so I learnt so much working with him about how to introduce pictures in particular, and how to kind of curate pieces of furniture. And I'd be there looking at 5 paintings stacked against the wall, trying to decide which one to put in the room. And my decision would be based on colour, the frame,
Yeah.
and that frame goes with that frame. And he's a lot more au fait with fine art and history of art. And he's like, no. This room is the most important room of the house. You've got to have the best quality portraits in here. So he was looking at how the painting had been executed, and that was informing his decision over and above any kind of aesthetic.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. And I'd never kind of thought about curating a space in that way, informed by those elements until that point. So that was great fun. I really enjoyed that.
I think when we look at design, or I look at design, it's not just how it looks, but how it makes you feel.
Yes.
How do you want people to feel when they step into one of your designs? Especially if it's their own home, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, I think the building is actually a really important part in that mix, in that relationship. And, one of the things we always go on and on and on about as a practice is the building is the client.
Wow.
The person that pays your fee just happens to live there for a bit, and they got in touch with you to work on it. But actually, the building should call the shots in terms of what's done to it and how. And if you take that approach, then hopefully it'll work, and it'll become a home, and everything will gel together.
Have you ever worked on a Georgian interior without being in a Georgian building? Perhaps a modern space where the owner wants it to feel Georgian?
Not really. For me, that's a bit like a kind of, bit of tofu shaped into a drumstick.
If you're gonna be vegetarian, why shape into a drumstick?
And what's I find really strange, which you meet a lot, is people buying a period home, a period building, and then doing so much to it that actually you might as well just be in a new build, because all of the character is removed, all of the softened edges are sharpened, and everything is covered. And it's like, well, why have you bothered to find such a beautiful ancient building? I always say it's like lines in a face, an ancient old granny with wrinkles, in her face. She looks beautiful because of her age, and those wrinkles are part of her beauty. And I kind of, I like a ceiling with cracks in it, and I love skirting that's scuffed. I kind of, for me, the most homely homes are ones where the same owner has lived there, and a family has come and gone through it over like 20 or 30 years, and it's all a bit worn out. And there's evidence of people having lived in that space, and they've left their mark. That is so beautiful, and that's something that you cannot recreate. You can furnish a place in such a way that it might promote those marks happening, but you can't really recreate that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of people who may not live in Bath or may not live in a Georgian building in Bath, but they want that Georgian feel. But yeah, the building itself is built differently, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's very, very difficult to recreate. I mean, okay, there's one example which I think is probably the closest to what you're talking about, which is where um, there was a building that had lots of newly built. So there was a kind of ancient core to it, but then lots of newly built extensions coming off it. And the client was really keen to kind of unite the look and feel and lose all of the crispness from those newer spaces. And so we did lots of work on surface texture.
Okay.
So, for example, wherever there were walls like the ones you have here that are, made from plasterboard and skimmed with a very, very universal kind of 2 mil thickness of multi-finish plaster skim. It's that perfect look that the best plasterers achieve. And actually what we needed was a really rubbish plasterer or needed to teach a good plasterer how to plaster really badly, which is really hard thing to do. But we used like a restoration plaster where the skim varied from kind of 1 mil to 6-7 mil in places. And what that enabled us to do was actually to kind of get undulation across the surface, which when you're stood head on looking at a wall you might not really notice, but turn a table lamp on that's against that wall, and the way that the light is cast across that undulation just gives you that ancient feel. Or the way a shadow might be cast across it, it just distorts it in just enough for it to kind of be softened. And ditto all of the modern angle beads that form the corners, like you've got round your window behind you. Any of that sharpness just went.
Yeah.
And we introduced, we either kind of formed the corners by hand so that they have a slight radius to them, or introduced timber dowels to form the corners, which is how it was always done before, which immediately softens it. And I think especially corners that you walk around, it's just so much nicer passing through an archway, let's say, where the corners are slightly rounded off, versus that very, very sharp modern angle beaded.
Yeah, you don't want to cut your shoulder in a corner.
I mean, literally, some of these buildings are so sharp,
Yes, yeah.
So that was an example where we took a modern structure and tried to kind of soften it and make it feel like and it was, I think it was really successful. I think, you'd be hard pushed to kind of, when you're put inside that space, to not think that it was at least a couple of 100 years old.
I never thought of that. I thought it was about furniture. I thought it was fabrics and everything. I never thought about working first on this, on the walls, on the structure, and making it look
Walls
imperfect.
And floors and ceilings are so important to getting that look, I guess.
Because we've worked so hard on making the buildings look perfect in the modern age, but now even in my shop, the antique shop, it's so hard to get shelving, for instance, because every angle has a different measurement.
Yes.
We needed custom fit shelving.
Yeah.
Because what's in the front and in the back are completely different dimensions.
Exactly.
And putting the shelving together, it was like, okay, that's shelving number 1 for this location because it will not fit in that location.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to take lots of different measurements, and I just appreciate that every time you go to a Georgian house and things don't look perfect.
Yes.
It's not because somebody put it up wrong. It's just the building.
It's the wrinkles in the old lady's face,
Yeah, it's not symmetric.
And these people, I mean, you really, Botox. Sometimes you walk into an old house and it's just been Botox.
Oh, right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just doesn't look right.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, I despair sometimes when I walk into a place that's just been kind of, lined out with this very, very crisp,
ironed out
everywhere.
look.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. Well, we'll be back with more business conversation with Patrick after this.
Made locally in Bath. This is Radio Bath.
We're back with Brave Business Conversation. Williams, founder of Berdoulat, and we are talking about creativity. I love talking and digging up about how creative people find their inspiration. You know, people say, oh, I kind of meditating, or writers typically say, if you write a certain amount of pages every day, it just flows, right? So how do you get inspired? What inspires you?
Well, I've tried meditation.
Have you? Has it worked?
No, not yet, but I'm going to persevere on that one. But I think it's interesting in terms of how I work. I think things like the music you listen to whilst you work can really get you in the right frame of mind for certain things. And if I'm doing a really quite a boring task, like a reflected ceiling plan, like a wiring diagram for a room, where I'm like, okay, there'll be this switch here and that light fitting there and that plug there. You know, it's kind of quite, it's
technical and
technical,
boring.
yeah. So, and sometimes I'll just put on some kind of really like Nirvana or something that just I just kind of plow through it with this quite kind of full-on grunge music. And then if I'm doing my accounts, I'll put on Bach, and it just really helps me with that kind of mathematical, the purity that you need to get you through that kind of, all of those calculations and so on. It just puts me in the right kind of mindset for that. But in terms of what inspires me, I guess, one of the things I love the most about living in Bath, beyond the architecture that we spoke about, is that it's surrounded by beautiful nature. And even when you're in the centre of town, you can always see a hill and a tree. And where we are, you're 7 or 8 minutes walk from a field with cows. True. And we try to, and we've, often kind of out walking the dog, and that's just a really nice way of always immersing yourself in your natural surroundings. But at weekends, we often go a bit further out. And, it's so lovely. You're so close to really, really special countryside and landscape. And I absolutely love that. And I feel so kind of refreshed, in that environment, having been in that environment.
Have you ever felt blocked? Like, writers have writer's block for days and days.
Yeah,
they try.
I mean, often bathrooms are a nightmare. I find
you feel blocked just being in one.
Yeah.
Sometimes in a Georgian bathroom.
Yeah.
The size of your shoulder.
I mean, I think the best bathrooms are rooms that don't really look or feel like bathrooms. They're just like a kind of living room with a bath in the corner. But it's often, it's often the case that you need to kind of, they're often quite small spaces.
Yes.
And so you need to kind of think about storage and water and all these kind of boring things, like practical things like that. And I find I often have a bit of a block when I'm thinking about bathrooms. And I kind of try and remind myself to not think about them in a bathroomy way. And, try and think about them as any other space. And I think it's interesting. We are kind of conditioned into. I've not been to the bathroom in this building, but if I went there now, I kind of know what to expect.
It looks like a bathroom.
There'll be white sanitary ware, a tiled splashback above a kind of white basin, probably with a chrome tap. And it's really interesting that, not just with bathrooms, but with kitchens as well. Since the 1950s, we've all got these kind of fitted kitchens, and the proportions of the cabinets are dictated by appliances, and a 600 by 600 appliance is just, it's not a very beautiful form. And going back to, imagine a golden ratio inspired dishwasher.
Ooh. Ooh.
Do you know what I mean, though? These rooms that we now spend most of our lives in are actually the form of the cabinets is kind of inspired by these strange kind of things.
Yeah.
And we don't furnish our kitchens necessarily in the same way that we might our living rooms.
Yeah.
And we don't think about dishwashers as pieces of furniture. And that's something that's I've always kind of been really interested in is you know, why is it okay to just have these built-in cabinets with a worktop and a sink, and you know, it's just kind of boring and a bit.
Well, why was it okay just to have your fridge out there like a silver monument in this beautifully decorated kitchen? Why didn't you just put a door or a shelf, something, a built-in something? No. I mean, I grew up. Oh, do you? I don't. I grew up with a fridge being an appliance, just sticking out there.
Yeah.
And even if we had a beautiful like wood, because I obviously grew up in a tropical country, lots of wood, teak, granite, all that stuff. But the fridge was a fridge.
Yeah.
I mean, just one piece of wood, just right over it, make it look like a shelf or a.
But you remember in the 1990s when Apple suddenly designed a computer that looked like a really interesting, you know, piece of sculpture almost. It had qualities beyond the sort of beige. Remember when computer monitors were like beige?
Well, yeah. But then the typing was like this green little texty type, and everything was huge. Remember what televisions used to look like?
Yeah. But, hang on though, because televisions, if you go further back, were beautiful. They were thought about as pieces of furniture.
Yes.
And you've got an old-fashioned radio on the reception desk here, you know, that kind of harks back to that, where, you know, Bakelite radio, they were beautiful things. I mean,
and now the new speakers, the new Bose speakers,
are
going back to that design. We're talking about bathrooms, right? I find that if I go to a restaurant or a cafe or something, the best bathrooms, it's like a collection box. It's like a box of collectibles.
Yeah.
So I can't remember exactly what your bathrooms look like, but I remember this one. They had a collection of jokes, like you know, signs, funny signages. One of them had a collection of stamps. One of them had a collection of stickers, even though individually they're quite ugly, but somehow put together. Notes, ads. And I feel like, what do you do when you're in the bathroom? You know, you're kind of not doing much with your thinking.
Yes.
You're more doing stuff with your body, right?
Yeah.
But then going around and you're in a daze, you know, when you're in the bathroom, and it's just nice to say, oh, that's a nice stamp collection there, and you're just not really thinking much. So when I look at bathroom, especially because ours here in this Georgian town is so small, it does feel like a box. And I just feel like I'm in someone's collectibles box, and I wonder what they're collecting.
Well, I think it's really interesting. It's a very English thing, I think, that one's loo, especially the downstairs loo, is often this kind of, that's the space where you can be eccentric.
Oh, okay.
You know? And so people, they always get a kind of crazy wallpaper or, you know, a really, you know, like you say, the kind of, there's a sense of humor, isn't there? There's often the kind of funny side of, you know, people put their school and university photos in the loo. I love that. I think that's a really nice tradition, and you kind of go to the loo and there's a bit of entertainment there.
It is.
For that moment when you're in there, you know.
And it kind of shows about the owner. It shows a lot more information about the owner, sometimes almost personal. I mean, personally, what does the owner feel like?
Yes.
For our home, we've got family pictures everywhere because my partner has lots of children and now grandchildren and everything. And the loo, the downstairs loo, is again a collection of all the photos of the family in Australia.
Yeah.
So as the kids are growing up and everything, so we literally just put so many pictures together, and it's almost like it amplifies what that family was all about.
Yes.
You know,
yes. And
what the owner's all about.
It's a kind of a big kind of group portrait.
Yeah.
You know, and I think we were talking earlier about you know, this height tree that you often meet. It's sometimes on the back of a cupboard door, or you know, in a house where
people measure the children's height
as children
they
are
grow
growing up. You know, I think they are so beautiful, and they're portraits. You know, and we in our kitchen we've actually got this column kind of in the middle of the space, and so when we moved from Berdoulat, the house in France where we all grew up, I got a friend who lives in a nearby village to go back there and document the height tree on the back of a cupboard that my parents had kept. And then we moved to London, and I had a height tree there which I documented that had people like, you know, my goddaughter and that sort of thing as she was growing up. And then when we first moved to Bath, we had this B&B, and we had a height tree there with our children on it. And then where we are currently, we've got a continuation of it. And I've actually kind of transplanted all of these height trees from all of these spaces where I've lived all onto this one column. And what's really interesting is you can look at me aged 18 months and kind of track it across to, you know, a new member of the family who's 18 months and see how heights compare. You know, so my daughter might measure herself and it's the same height as her cousin when her cousin was a year younger than her.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating to kind of, and it's also got names of, you know, people in the family who are no longer with us, but they're there.
Right.
There's that record of them in the space.
Exactly.
Which is really beautiful.
It's really nice. Well, it's lovely to have you.
Thank you.
And for all those listeners, if you haven't been to Patrick's practice, it's funny that you call it practice. I just call it a really cool cafe and showroom. It's in Margaret's Buildings. And it's called Berdoulat, and you can't miss it. And hopefully Patrick will be there, or his wife Neri will be there. And they've got great coffee, great pastries, great bread, and great hospitality. So it's really, really nice. Are you having some events coming up that you want to talk about?
So we've got an event to celebrate the Chinese New Year. That's our next one that's coming up soon. Which is going to be fun. Lots of amazing, delicious food and
I'll be there.
Exciting decoration as well. And there should be, I mean, we've had to kind of slightly take our foot off the gas pedal with events just because of everything with Omicron. But it feels like the path is being cleared now for all sorts of exciting events. So there's lots of cookery book authors who are keen to come and do some demonstrations and cook in the shop, and then do kind of supper clubs related to that. There's also some music events. So we actually purchased a virginals instrument, which is kind of like a harpsichord, but smaller.
Well, I've seen that in your shop.
Yeah,
yes.
So we actually got that because we wanted to host a whole load of early music concerts in the space.
Oh, wonderful.
And then a chap who lives just around the corner found out that we had a virginals, and turns out he's the most incredible early music keyboard player. And so he came and gave a performance on it just before Christmas, and is really excited about doing an early music festival in the shop.
Wonderful. We look forward to that. I'm definitely interested in the Chinese New Year one, because I don't think I've ever gone to any Chinese New Year event in Bath.
Yeah,
so this is going to be
haven't.
great. It's going to be great. We'll be back next week with Brave Business Conversations.
This is Radio Bath.